Before time learned how to move forward, before memory learned how to hold on, before sound learned how to become language, there was intention. Creation did not begin as chaos, struggling toward order, nor as violence, shaping structure. It began as division, made with precision. Light was separated from darkness, not because one was good and the other evil, but because contrast was necessary for awareness. Sky was lifted away from water. Land rose and learned how to bear weight. The earth inhaled for the first time and did not forget how to breathe. The sun was positioned not merely to illuminate, but to govern. The moon was placed to soften the night, to reflect rather than command. The stars were scattered across the firmament like markers in an immense design, measuring seasons, signaling passage, reminding creation that time itself was alive. Days began to move, nights learned how to end, cycles formed, repeated, and became law. Plants responded without hesitation, roots searched for water, leaves bent instinctively toward light. Growth occurred without doubt. Animals emerged into existence already knowing how to move, how to eat, how to survive. They followed patterns written into them long before thought was possible. Nothing questioned its role, nothing resisted its nature. And yet, something essential was missing. There was motion, but no reflection, breath, but no self-awareness, instinct, but no understanding. Creation existed, but it did not yet know that it existed. So from the dust of the earth, a new form was shaped. This being was not designed merely to survive. It was formed to observe, to name, to remember. When breath entered this body, Adam opened his eyes and did something no other living thing had done before him. He did not simply see the world, he recognized it. He saw separation and called it sky and ground. He saw movement and named it river and wind. He saw animals and assigned them sounds that became identity. Naming brought structure. Structure brought comfort. Comfort felt like purpose. In this way, Adam stood at the center of creation, not as a ruler, but as an organizer of meaning. Eden was prepared for him, a garden without hunger, without decay, without death. Fruit hung within reach, water flowed without resistance. Animals did not fear him. The earth responded to his touch. Everything worked as it should. But perfection revealed a quiet flaw. Adam walked the same paths each day. He observed the same cycles. He spoke and the world listened, yet there was no voice to answer him with understanding, no one to challenge his thoughts, no one to stand beside him and ask why the world worked as it did. Wonder unshared became isolation. God saw this absence and named it. It was not good for the human to be alone. So another being was shaped from the same earth, formed by the same breath, but she was not taken from Adam. She was not created for him. She was placed beside him. Her name was Lilith. From the moment she opened her eyes, Eden felt different. Lilith did not begin by naming what she saw. She began to listen. She placed her hands against tree bark and felt memory in its texture. She followed insects not out of curiosity alone, but to understand intention. She sensed that the garden was alive in a way words could not fully contain. And the garden responded to her, not with obedience, but with recognition. Adam and Lilith walked the same ground, yet experienced entirely different worlds. Adam stood within order. Lilith stood within connection. Adam understood creation as a system. Lilith experienced it as a relationship. He categorized, she interpreted. He sought stability, she sought meaning. These differences did not immediately create conflict. At first, they created balance. Eden breathed with them both. Lilith wandered farther than Adam ever cared to. She explored edges of the garden where light softened into shadow, where sounds thinned into silence. She noticed places where the garden hesitated, as if holding secrets it had never been asked to reveal. She did not fear these spaces, she respected them. Animals sensed her awareness. Predators rested near her without aggression. Birds perched on her shoulders. She did not command them, she acknowledged them. Pain did not frighten her, she understood it as information rather than punishment. Adam watched her with admiration and uncertainty. He believed the garden responded to him because he had been placed at its center. Lilith believed the garden responded because it was being heard. Their conversations reflected this divide. Adam spoke of roles, of purpose assigned from above, of order as proof of divine wisdom. Lilith spoke of balance, of choice, of meaning discovered through experience rather than instruction. Neither sought dominance, neither intended harm, but difference left unnamed has a way of becoming distance. Slowly, Adam's language shifted. Equality became sequence, sequence became hierarchy. He spoke of being made first, of responsibility implying authority, of structure requiring leadership. Lilith listened as these words closed around her, like narrowing walls. She reminded him they were shaped from the same earth, filled with the same breath. He reminded her of order. And something delicate began to fracture. Eden did not change at once. It waited. But Lilith felt it immediately. She was being asked to quiet the questions that defined her, to follow a path she had not chosen, to exist within boundaries she had never agreed to. And for the first time since creation began, a being within Eden asked a forbidden thing. Not a question about fruit, but a question about freedom.
Silence did not fall on Eden all at once. It arrived slowly, like a shadow that lengthens without being noticed. After Lilith's departure, the garden still bloomed, the rivers still flowed, and the sky still carried its measured light. But something essential had been removed, something that could not be replanted. Adam continued his days as he always had. He walked the same paths, touched the same trees, and spoke the same names aloud. But the world no longer answered him in the way it once had. The animals did not linger. The birds flew higher, as if the air near the ground had grown heavy. Even the wind seemed cautious, brushing past him without carrying scent or sound. At first, Adam told himself this was peace. No arguments, no questions, no challenges to the order he believed had been set. He told himself that stillness was harmony. But stillness is not always harmony. Sometimes it is absence. He began to notice how often he spoke aloud, narrating his own movements as if to reassure himself that the world was still listening. He named plants that did not need names. He repeated names he had already given, hoping repetition might summon meaning. "She spoke too much," he said once to the river. "She questioned everything." The water moved on, indifferent. Days passed, then weeks. Lilith did not return. Adam sat often by the stream where they had once rested together. He remembered her presence, not as opposition, but as expansion. When she walked beside him, the garden had felt larger, as though her curiosity stretched the boundaries of the world itself. He remembered how she listened, not just to him, but to the earth, to the pauses between sounds. She had not rushed to fill silence, she had trusted it. Now silence surrounded him, but it did not feel trustworthy. One evening, as the sky dimmed into its familiar gradient, Adam stood at the center of Eden and called out to God. His voice carried confusion, and beneath it, something closer to regret. "The woman you gave me is gone," he said. "I followed the order you gave. I named the creatures. I tended the garden. I kept the structure you set." God did not answer immediately. If Eden is perfect, why does it feel unfinished? The question hung in the air longer than Adam expected. When God finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried weight. She left because she could not remain whole here. Adam lowered his head. She refused the order. She refused to be less than what she was. The words settled slowly. Adam understood something then, too late to change it. Leadership without equality had not created harmony. It had created distance. "She was not created to follow me," Adam said quietly. "She was created to walk beside me." And when she could not, she chose to walk alone. Adam said nothing more. Beyond Eden, Lilith lived under a sky that did not promise protection. The desert offered no comfort, no softness, no forgiveness. But it did not demand submission either. Each day tested her endurance, and each night reminded her of her solitude. Freedom had weight. It pressed against her chest in moments of stillness. "I asked for freedom, not ease," she whispered to the stars. Time in the wilderness moved differently. Days blurred into nights. She learned the language of wind and stone. She learned how to listen without expecting answers. And in that listening, something inside her deepened. Then the dreams began. They came not as nightmares, but as invitations. Shapes formed at the edge of sleep. Figures without names, beings untouched by obedience or command. When they appeared before her, she did not run. "You live without chains, so do I." From that meeting, new life emerged, wild, unbound, born not of command, but of choice. Lilith did not rule them, she did not command them. She stood among them as equal presence. "I did not leave Eden to become someone's master. I left to belong to myself." Back in Eden, imbalance deepened. God watched Adam move through the garden like a shadow of his former self. The world responded less each day. Balance required response. God did not force Lilith's return. Instead, he sent messengers, Senoi, Sensenoi, and Semangalath, to deliver a final question disguised as command. Lilith met them without fear. "I will not return, but I accept the cost of my choice." She offered a covenant, not submission, but boundary, protection through names, not through obedience. The angels accepted. When God received their report, he did not act in anger. Lilith's exile was not punishment. It was consequence. Then God shaped a second beginning. From Adam's rib he formed Eve, not from the earth beside him, but from his body itself. She was shaped for harmony, not resistance. Eve entered Eden without questions. She accepted what was given. She listened. She followed. Adam smiled again. From the edge of the world, Lilith watched. "She has peace," Lilith observed, "but no choice." Lilith stepped closer to Eden's boundary. The garden did not resist her. Beneath the tree of knowledge, Eve rested, unaware. "She has never been told she may choose," Lilith whispered. As night fell, Lilith changed her form. She became smaller, quieter, closer to the earth. The serpent did not carry lies, it carried possibility. She did not command Eve, she did not speak God's name. She offered silence. And in that silence, a choice would soon be made.
This was not the end of Eden. It was the beginning of awareness, and the world would never return to innocence again.
The night in Eden passed quietly, unaware of the shift that had already begun. Adam and Eve slept beneath the trees, wrapped in a peace that felt natural only because it had never been questioned. The garden breathed around them, steady and ordered, its rhythms unchanged on the surface. Yet beneath that calm, something ancient stirred, something older than rules, older than obedience. Lilith remained hidden among the roots of the tree of knowledge. In the form of the serpent, she did not feel diminished. If anything, she felt closer to the pulse of the world than she ever had before. The ground carried memory, the tree carried weight, and the fruit above her held not evil, but awareness. This tree was never forbidden because it was corrupt, she thought. It was forbidden because it reveals. She watched Eve as dawn approached. Eve rose slowly, brushing the grass from her hands. Her movements were gentle, unburdened by doubt. She did not scan the horizon the way Lilith once had. She did not listen for meanings hidden beneath sound. Her life had been shaped around trust. Eve approached the tree of knowledge again, not drawn by desire, but by curiosity she did not yet recognize as her own. She reached out, touching the bark lightly, as if asking permission from the tree itself. Lilith did not speak at first. She understood something deeply now. A command creates obedience, but silence creates space, and space allows choice. Eve's fingers traced the rough surface of the trunk. Her eyes moved upward, following the curve of the branches until they rested on the fruit. Golden, heavy, complete. Lilith spoke at last, her voice low, measured, without urgency. "Does it ever trouble you," she asked, "that everything here has been named for you, but never by you?" Eve startled, stepping back slightly. She had never heard a voice like this, not commanding, not instructing, not familiar. "Who are you?" Eve asked. "A question, just as you are." Eve frowned, confused but not afraid. "Adam says the garden is perfect." "And do you know why he believes that?" Lilith asked. "Because God made it so." Lilith's voice softened. "And do you know why you believe it?" Eve hesitated. She searched for an answer that had never been required of her before. Because I was told." Lilith allowed the silence to stretch. "This fruit," she said finally, "will not make you disobedient. It will make you aware. You will still love the garden. You will still love Adam, but you will know yourself." Eve looked again at the fruit. "Adam said we must not eat it." Lilith tilted her head slightly. "Did he say why?" "No." "And did God tell you?" Eve shook her head. The world seemed to pause. Even the leaves above them barely moved. "Then the choice has never been explained, only enforced." Eve's hand trembled as she reached upward. In that moment, the future held its breath. When Eve's fingers closed around the fruit, nothing shattered, no thunder fell, no voice thundered from the sky. There was only the weight of the fruit in her hand and the sudden realization that the decision had been hers. She bit into it. The taste was not sweet, it was not bitter, it was clarity. The world sharpened around her, colors deepened, sounds layered. She became aware not only of what surrounded her, but of herself as a separate being within it. Her eyes widened. "I see," she whispered. Lilith said nothing. She watched. Eve looked down at her hands, at her body, at the space between herself and the world. For the first time, she understood obedience had been a state of unknowing. When Adam approached, drawn by the change he could not yet name, Eve turned toward him. "Adam," she said, "we have never chosen anything." Adam frowned. "What do you mean?" She held out the fruit.
The moments stretched. Adam's trust warred with fear. He had been shaped by order. Choice felt like fracture. But he took the fruit, and with that, the world shifted irrevocably. Awareness spread through Eden like fire beneath the soil. The garden did not die, but its innocence did. God knew immediately, not because rules had been broken, but because balance had changed. When he came to them, Adam and Eve did not hide out of shame alone, but out of recognition. They knew they were no longer children within the garden. They had become participants in it. "Who told you that you were naked?" God asked, not as an accusation, but as an inquiry. Adam's voice faltered. Eve's did not. "We saw ourselves," she said. God turned his gaze beyond them, towards the edges of Eden where Lilith no longer stood. He understood now what her departure had begun. Eden had been a place of protection, but also of limitation. Humanity could not remain untouched and still become complete. The garden did not reject them, it released them. When Adam and Eve were sent beyond Eden's boundaries, the ground beneath their feet felt harder, unshaped, demanding effort. They carried knowledge now. With it came labor, pain, and mortality, but also authorship. From afar, Lilith watched them walk into the world. "They will struggle," she said to the wind, "but they will know why." She did not return to Eden. She did not seek forgiveness or recognition. Her role had never been to remain. She had been the beginning of awareness. As humanity stepped into history, stories formed around her name, twisted, sharpened by fear. She would be called demon, temptress, exile. But beneath every warning lay a truth too dangerous to speak plainly. That freedom begins with refusal, that knowledge demands cost, and that silence, when chosen, can be more powerful than command. Lilith turned away from Eden for the final time. The world ahead was vast, unfinished, and uncertain, but it was real, and for the first time, humanity would walk it with open eyes.
The world beyond Eden did not welcome Adam and Eve with mercy. It did not reject them either. It simply existed, vast, unfinished, indifferent. The soil was harder beneath their feet, resisting their steps instead of yielding gently as the garden floor once had. The air felt heavier, no longer balanced for comfort alone. Eve was the first to notice the difference. In Eden, the world had met her needs before she could name them. Here, nothing moved unless she did. Hunger announced itself sharply. Cold lingered longer in the shadows. The sun no longer felt like a gift, it felt like force. This is what it means to live, she realized, not to be held, but to stand. Adam struggled more quietly. He had lost not only the garden, but the certainty of structure. In Eden, order had been visible, unquestioned, reinforced by God's presence and the world's response. Outside, the order had to be built by hand, decision by decision. Each day demanded choices he had never been trained to make. At night, they rested beside a fire they had learned to shape from friction and patience. The flames flickered unpredictably, neither obedient nor wild, only responsive. Eve watched the fire closely. "It moves like knowledge," she said once, "dangerous if ignored, powerful if understood." Adam did not answer immediately. He was still learning how to listen without leading. Far from them, Lilith walked the boundary lands where desert met wind and stone. She felt the shift ripple through creation the moment humanity crossed Eden's threshold. Something ancient had been unlocked, not sin, but authorship. "They have begun," she said to the night. "Now they must continue." Stories about Lilith had already begun to form, whispers carried by the winds, shaped by fear and distance. She was named corrupter, deceiver, shadow. It did not surprise her. Freedom has always frightened those who depend on order. I was never the fall. I was the opening. Adam and Eve learned the language of consequence quickly. Seeds did not always grow. Animals no longer approached without caution. Pain followed mistakes without apology. And yet, something new existed between them. Eve no longer waited for Adam's direction before acting. She observed. She decided. Sometimes she failed. Sometimes she succeeded. But every action belonged to her. Adam noticed this change with unease and then with admiration. "You see things before I do now," he admitted one evening. Eve nodded. "Because I am no longer looking through your certainty, I am looking through my own." Adam said nothing, but something loosened inside him. God watched them from a distance that was not absence, but restraint. He did not intervene. To do so would have undone the choice he had allowed. Creation was no longer a controlled environment. It was a collaboration. Still, consequences had to be named. Pain entered the world not as punishment, but as signal. Labor became necessary. Birth carried danger. Life shortened, but so did meaning sharpen. Adam began to understand what Lilith had seen long before he had. Order without choice was not harmony, it was stasis, and stasis could not grow. There were nights he dreamed of Lilith, not as exile, not as demon, but as mirror. She walked away because she saw farther than I did, he thought. Eve dreamed differently. She dreamed of paths that split and rejoined, of doors without signs, of voices that did not command, but asked. In one such dream, she saw Lilith standing beneath a sky with no walls. "You are not my enemy," Eve said in the dream. Lilith smiled. "Nor am I your guide. I only opened a door." Humanity's story began to spread outward from that first campfire. Children were born who knew nothing of Eden's softness, only of its myth. They learned through touch, failure, effort, and story. Lilith remained at the edge of those stories, sometimes feared, sometimes invoked, never fully understood. She watched generations rise and fall. She watched humans build rules, break them, rewrite them. She watched them argue over obedience and freedom, law and rebellion. "They are still asking the same question," she observed. "Who decides?" God did not erase her from the world. He allowed her to exist as unresolved truth, because a world without unresolved truths becomes a prison. Time did what no command ever could. It multiplied stories. Long after Eden had faded into memory, and Adam and Eve had become names spoken rather than faces remembered, humanity spread across the land. Camps became villages, villages became cities, and with every generation, the distance from the garden grew, not only in space, but in understanding. What had once been lived was now told, and what is told is shaped by fear as much as by truth. The name Lilith did not disappear when she left Eden. It lingered in the quiet places, in the pauses between prayers, in the warnings whispered to children at night. At first, her name carried no sharp edges. She was remembered as the one who walked away, the one who chose solitude over submission, the one who would not bend. But memory is not neutral. As societies formed, order became sacred. Rules were no longer simply tools for survival. They became pillars of identity. To question them was to threaten stability, and so the story shifted. Lilith was no longer spoken of as the first woman. She became the warning. She refused her place, elders said, and look what followed. They did not speak of choice, they spoke of consequence. She listened to herself instead of the command. They did not speak of freedom, they spoke of chaos. In the telling, Lilith's departure from Eden transformed. No longer was it a decision made in clarity, it became rebellion, pride, defiance. The nuance vanished. What remained was a figure useful to authority. Because fear teaches faster than truth. Mothers hung charms by their children's beds, etched with the names of angels, Senoi, San Senoi, Samangalaf, not to remember a covenant, but to ward off a threat. Fathers spoke Lilith's name with caution, as if saying it too clearly might invite her attention. She comes in the night, they said. She steals children. She whispers disobedience. She punishes those who forget their place. None of them had seen her. Lilith watched these stories grow like shadows cast by firelight. She did not interfere. She had learned long ago that correcting a story often strengthens it. They fear me because I remind them, she said to the wind, and reminders are dangerous to systems built on forgetting. She moved through the world unseen, not because she hid, but because humanity had already decided what she was. They no longer looked for truth, they looked for confirmation. As laws hardened, so did roles. Men were taught to lead without listening. Women were taught to endure without questioning. Children were taught obedience before understanding. And whenever one of them resisted, whenever a woman spoke too loudly, whenever a man refused inherited authority, whenever a child asked a question with no easy answer, Lilith's name surfaced. Do not become like her. Lilith became the boundary of acceptable thought. The irony did not escape her. I am blamed for the fracture, she reflected, yet the fracture already existed. I merely refused to seal it. There were moments when humans came close to seeing her clearly. Mystics, wanderers, those who lived at the edges of society rather than its center. They sensed her presence not as threat, but as question. One such woman stood alone beneath a moonless sky, whispering into the dark. Are you real? Lilith answered not with words, but with recognition, a feeling, a knowing. The woman wept. I thought I was broken, she said. You are not broken, Lilith replied within her. You are awake. But awakenings were dangerous. Most did not survive them intact. Institutions rose, temples, laws, doctrines, each claiming to speak with divine authority. God's name was used often now, attached to rules he had never spoken. His silence was interpreted as approval, and Lilith's image darkened further. She was given wings not of freedom, but of menace. She was given claws, fangs, hunger. Her children were no longer symbols of unbound life, but monsters blamed for death and disease. Every unexplained loss was laid at her feet. Every fear needed a face. Lilith did not deny these stories. She needed me to be this, she understood. If I am evil, then obedience becomes virtue without question. God observed this transformation with restraint. He did not correct humanity's myth-making. To do so would have violated the very freedom that had begun in Eden. Truth, once released, must survive without protection. Adam's descendants rarely spoke his name with reverence anymore. He had become an ancestor, then a symbol, then a footnote. Eve's name endured longer, associated with temptation, weakness, origin. Lilith's name endured longest, because she represented that which could not fully be erased: choice. There were nights when Lilith wondered if silence had been the right path, if she should have spoken more, intervened, corrected. But she remembered Eden. She remembered that no one grows by being told who they are. Growth requires risk. And so she remained in the margins, present but unseen, named but unknown. She appeared in dreams as questions, in art as contradiction, in forbidden texts as possibility. Every era reshaped her to fit its fear, and every era, somewhere, someone felt her presence and stood a little straighter because of it. A girl refusing a life chosen for her, a man stepping away from inherited cruelty, a voice speaking when silence would have been safer. They did not call her name. They did not need to. Lilith walked through centuries, carrying the weight of misunderstanding without trying to shed it. She had accepted long ago that freedom does not come with good reputation. "Let them fear me," she said. "Fear is the echo of something they have not yet dared to face." And so the myth solidified. Lilith, the demon. Lilith, the night mother. Lilith, the enemy of order. But beneath the layers of distortion, the truth remained unchanged. She had not sought to rule. She had not sought to destroy. She had sought to choose. And that, more than any monster, was what the world had never forgiven. As humanity continued forward, building, conquering, believing, the shadow of Lilith followed, not as curse, but as reminder that obedience without awareness is comfort, but awareness, once awakened, never truly sleeps.
Long after Eden faded into memory, after the rivers were renamed and the paths between worlds were forgotten, Lilith no longer existed as a woman in the minds of humans. She had become something else entirely, a name spoken quietly, a story altered with each retelling, a warning wrapped in fear. What had once been a living choice was slowly reshaped into a symbol of danger. This did not happen all at once. It happened the way all distortions happen, gradually, deliberately, and always in the service of order. The children of Adam and Eve multiplied. They built shelters, then villages, then laws. With every generation, the memory of Eden became less about harmony and more about loss. Humans searched for reasons: why the world was harsh, why birth was painful, why desire felt like both gift and threat. They looked backward and reshaped the past until it explained the present. Lilith's name survived because it carried something useful. She represented the possibility that someone could say no, and that possibility was dangerous. Priests spoke of her first. They needed an origin for disorder. They needed a figure who embodied refusal. In their telling, Lilith was no longer the one who left by choice. She was the one who rebelled without cause. Her questions became arrogance. Her independence became corruption. Her absence from Eden was rewritten as punishment. Stories were told around fires of a woman who would not submit, who fled the garden, who wandered the edges of the world. Each telling added teeth, claws, shadows. Fear made the story memorable. Fear made it spread. Mothers whispered her name to restless children, not as history, but as threat. "Sleep," they said, "or Lilith will come." And the name sank deep into the unconscious, attaching itself to the night, to desire, to everything uncontrollable. Yet Lilith herself did not vanish. She moved through the world differently now, not as flesh bound to one place, but as presence. She watched humans struggle beneath rules they no longer remembered choosing. She saw women learn to lower their eyes, to quiet their voices, to shape themselves smaller so the world would not punish them. She saw men learn to fear what they could not command. Each fear fed the myth. Religious texts hardened. What had once been poetic became prescriptive. Order required clarity, and clarity required enemies. Lilith was perfect for this role because she could not speak back. Her story was told without her voice. They called her a demon, then the mother of demons, then the enemy of children. Every label stripped away context until only terror remained. But demons, too, are mirrors. What humans feared in Lilith was not destruction, it was autonomy. She embodied the idea that creation did not end with obedience, that being formed by God did not mean surrendering one's will. God watched this transformation in silence, not because he approved and not because he was absent, but because freedom had consequences and humans were now exercising theirs. They were free to remember and free to distort, free to tell stories that protected their systems. Lilith became a boundary marker. Where her name appeared, behavior was controlled, desire was regulated, questions were discouraged. The myth worked, and yet it never fully held. In dreams she appeared differently, not monstrous but luminous, not violent but distant. She came to those who lay awake questioning their place in the world. She spoke without words. She reminded them of something unnamed but familiar. Artists painted her in secret. Poets wrote around her name without using it. Women who felt confined sensed her presence without knowing why. Men who questioned authority felt her shadow at the edge of their thoughts. Lilith was no longer a being of one form. She was an idea that refused to be buried. Adam's descendants built altars and thrones. They spoke of obedience as virtue and submission as peace, and in doing so, they created a world that functioned but never fully breathed. Far from their cities, beyond the boundaries of law, Lilith remained what she had always been, untouched by command. She did not seek worship, she did not seek revenge. She existed as proof. Proof that another path had once been taken. Proof that paradise had not been lost through disobedience, but through fear of equality. As generations passed, Eve's name was honored, but her story was softened. She became the mother, the comfort, the repentance. Lilith became the absence, the unspoken alternative. Two paths born from the same beginning, and humanity walked between them, never fully choosing either. The myth of Lilith grew darker because darkness made it easier to reject her truth. If she was evil, then she could be ignored. If she was monstrous, then her choice did not need to be examined. But deep beneath the layers of story, the original question still lived. What does it mean to be created and still choose for yourself? That question lingered like an unresolved chord. It moved through centuries, through scriptures and revolutions, through whispered doubts and silent rebellions. Lilith waited, not for forgiveness, not for return. She waited for humanity to become ready to hear the part of the story it had buried. And when that time came, the name that had been turned into a warning would become something else entirely. Not a demon, but a mirror.
Centuries passed, then millennia. Cities rose and fell, names changed, gods were argued over, rewritten, defended and denied. Yet beneath all of it, beneath every law etched into stone and every prayer whispered into the dark, the same tension remained. Humanity had learned how to obey. It had learned how to survive, but it had never fully learned how to choose. Lilith felt the shift before it was spoken. She always did. It began quietly, a restlessness that spread without a source, people waking before dawn with the sense that something essential had been left unsaid, questions resurfacing in minds trained to silence them, women pausing before answering, men hesitating before commanding. The world did not collapse, but it trembled. Lilith moved through these cracks, not as a body, not as a voice, but as awareness. She appeared in moments of doubt, in the breath before refusal, in the ache of a life lived according to rules that no longer felt true. She did not tell anyone what to do. She only reminded them that choice existed. Religious institutions sensed the disturbance. Systems built on certainty always do. Scholars debated the rise of disobedience, of fractured belief, of individuals who no longer accepted answers simply because they were ancient. Some blamed moral decay, others blamed knowledge. Few understood that what was returning was older than any scripture. Lilith was not coming back as a figure to be worshipped or feared. She was returning as a question humanity could no longer avoid. In dreams, people stood at crossroads with no signs. In stories, characters walked away from destinies written for them. In art, eyes were painted looking outward instead of upward. The symbols multiplied. Adam's legacy, authority without reflection, began to weaken. Eve's legacy, life shaped through acceptance, began to strain. And between them, Lilith's truth pressed forward. Some tried to name her again, to define her, contain her, warn against her, but language failed this time. The old stories no longer held the same power. Fear still existed, but it no longer erased curiosity. A woman stood before a council and refused to recant her words. A man left a path his family had walked for generations. A child asked why and did not accept silence as an answer. None of them spoke Lilith's name. They did not need to. God watched, not from above, but through the unfolding of will. He had seen this moment before, in Eden, when the first question was asked. Then it had been contained. Now it could not be. This was not rebellion against creation. It was creation continuing. Lilith understood this better than anyone. She had never sought to undo what was made. She had only sought to stand within it as herself. And now humanity stood at the same threshold. She remembered Eden, not as loss, but as origin, the place where obedience had been mistaken for harmony, where peace had been built on silence, where perfection had left no room for becoming. That world could not return, nor should it. Those who sensed Lilith most clearly were not the powerful, but the uncertain, those who felt divided between who they were and who they were told to be. She did not resolve that division, she illuminated it. Freedom, she knew, was not comfort, it was responsibility. Many turned away when they realized this. They preferred certainty. They rebuilt old walls and called them tradition, and Lilith let them. Choice meant allowing refusal. But others stepped forward, not toward her, but toward themselves. In that movement, Lilith felt something change, not in the world, but in the story. For the first time, she was no longer alone in her knowing. The question she carried was being carried by many. God did not intervene. He had intervened once in Eden to preserve order. This time, he preserved possibility. Lilith did not seek his approval. She had never needed it. But she felt the space he left open, and she walked within it. The old myths cracked.
Demons lost their claws, angels lost their certainty. Humanity stood exposed, without simple explanations, and in that exposure something honest emerged. Lilith did not return to Eden, she returned to the world, not as a mother of monsters, not as a fallen woman, but as the echo of a truth humanity was finally ready to hear. You were created, but you were not created finished, and the story is not about who obeyed, it is about who chose. The question that once shattered paradise now moved freely among humankind, and this time there would be no garden to close behind it.
There was no final thunder, no fire from the heavens, no moment the world could point to and say, this is where everything ended. That was the first truth humanity had to face. Stories did not conclude the way myths promised. They unfolded, layered upon one another, changing shape as those who carried them changed in turn. Lilith understood this better than anyone. She no longer walked the world as she once had, not because she could not, but because she did not need to. Her presence had moved beyond place, beyond time. She existed now in the space between decision and action, in the breath a person took before choosing whether to obey or refuse, whether to remain silent or speak. Humanity had crossed a threshold, not all at once, not together, but irreversibly. The age of unquestioned obedience weakened. It did not collapse, but it cracked. Traditions remained, laws remained, hierarchies remained, but beneath them something restless stirred. People began to sense that meaning was not handed down fully formed, it had to be shaped. This realization frightened many. They searched for certainty in louder voices, stricter rules, clearer enemies, and once again some reached for Lilith's name. They tried to revive the old myth, to paint her as the source of chaos returning to the world. But the story no longer obeyed them, because Lilith was no longer a character they could control. She had become a question embedded in the human condition. God watched this final transformation with a stillness deeper than silence. Creation had reached a point he could not walk back, not without undoing the very freedom he had allowed from the beginning. He had shaped humanity with breath and dust, but he had not shaped its conclusions. That had never been his role. In Eden, he offered order. Outside Eden, he allowed meaning. Adam's legacy lived on in systems, in leadership, in the instinct to name and organize the world. Eve's legacy lived on in continuity, in care, in the quiet endurance of life moving forward. And Lilith's legacy, once rejected, once feared, lived on in the refusal to accept a place that denied the fullness of self. 3 paths, none complete on their own. Humanity moved among them, often without awareness, sometimes with painful clarity. There were moments when Lilith was felt most strongly, not in rebellion, but in recognition, when a person realized that the life they were living had been chosen for them long before they were asked, when they understood that comfort could exist without truth, when they saw that peace, built on silence, came at a cost. Lilith did not promise salvation. She never had. She offered awareness. And awareness, once gained, could not be undone. In distant places, people still told the old stories of demons in the night, of dangers tied to desire, of women who should not speak too loudly, and men who must never doubt. But even these stories began to fracture. Children asked questions the stories could not answer. Doubt crept in, not as destruction, but as invitation. Lilith listened. She listened the way she always had, not to words, but to intent. She felt the weight humanity carried now, the burden of choice.
No garden to blame, no command to hide behind, no perfection to return to, only the responsibility of becoming. And she knew this was the true exile Eden had postponed. God did not reclaim the garden. He let it remain a memory, not as punishment, but as contrast. Eden was what life looked like without choice. The world was what life became with it. Neither was simple, neither was pure, but only one was alive. Lilith did not seek reconciliation with Adam, or forgiveness from Eve's children, or acknowledgement from God. She needed none of it. Her existence had never depended on approval. It depended on truth. And truth, once spoken, moved on. The final understanding did not arrive as revelation, but as quiet acceptance. That the story of humanity was never about obedience versus rebellion. It was about consciousness, about the moment a created being realizes it is not merely an object within creation, but a participant in it. Lilith had reached that moment first. Others followed. Many still resisted. And that tension, that unresolved pull between safety and freedom, became the engine of human history. There was no ending where Lilith triumphed or vanished. There was only continuation. She remained where she had always been since leaving Eden, at the edge of certainty, at the border between what is given and what is chosen. If you listened closely, you could still hear her, not as a voice, but as a thought that did not belong to anyone else. The thought that asks, who would you be if no one told you who to become? That question did not destroy paradise. It revealed that paradise was never meant to be the final state. And so the story does not close. It passes forward, from myth to memory, from memory to thought, from thought to choice. And every time a human being stands at that threshold between obedience and awareness, Lilith is there. Not as a demon, not as a goddess, but as the reminder that creation was never finished. It was only begun.